Hello and welcome to the closing session of the inaugural Business Travel Show America, Risk Management Real Talk. I'm Jen Bankard. I'm the Director of Content Solutions and Conferences for the BTN Group, and I'm so pleased to be here today with Dale Buckner, the President and CEO of Global Guardian, Bruce McIndoe, who is the founder of WorldAware, and Jarrett Michaud, who's the CEO of the Americas for ISOS. To get the housekeeping out of the way, we will be conducting just a few polls during the session. I think by now all of you know where the Q&A panel is, so please send in your questions. We'll try and get to a few at the end. And of course, feel free to keep chatting with each other. I see all the hellos happening, which is great. The chat conversations over the past 2 days have been, I think, just as insightful as the sessions themselves. And please remember to give us your feedback at the end of the session. So in the spirit of transparency, I sent these three gentlemen an outline for the session without identifying who I was going to direct specific questions to. And I asked that, since the session is titled Risk Management Real Talk, if we could just have an open, unscripted, provocative conversation. And Dale responded that he loves aggressive and provocative because it equals the real world, not theory or corporate BS. Now, to be clear, he's the one who added the word aggressive, but I say, let's go ahead and take the gloves off and get started. So every morning I take a scroll through the New York Times app, and according to the New York Times this morning, there have now been more than 6.3 million cases of COVID in the US. 191,094 people have died. And yes, while new cases and deaths are trending down, yesterday alone, there were 33,201 new cases and 1,176 new deaths, which was more than the day before. So I may be stating the obvious, but this virus is not going away anytime soon. And so I'd like to start off with your thoughts on the state of the industry as it relates to the COVID pandemic. So are we, as an industry, doing enough to keep people safe and to help ensure those numbers keep trending down? Dale, I'm going to start with you, then I'm going to go to Jarrett, then I'm going to go to Bruce. So Dale, are we doing enough?
Yep. Well, I'll try and be brief here. I think obviously information is now flowing. I would say this has been about a 5-phase process. Starting back in March, we started to get serious about this. Information started to flow in open source. Companies like ours and others all started pushing it out. Interestingly enough, I would tell you that most of corporate America did not take it serious enough. I literally had senior executives from one of the largest insurance firms in the world laugh at me when I told them I thought this was going to go through the fall and we wouldn't see 30 to 40% of travel through the fall. And when I said that back in March, I was wrong. And you're going to see it's going to be a lot less than that through this fall. So I think, one, we started off where people just didn't believe it. And I think the information that started to flow, it took a while for people to really buy in. And I think the other thing that has really held this up in corporate America, and I think it's part of the human condition, we have a hard time as human beings separating ourselves, whether we are Republican, Democrat, independent, our religious beliefs, all these different factors drive how we're viewing this. And I think there's been an enormous amount of distrust of what the information says. And I think people can't separate themselves from their politics. Therefore, they're allowing their politics to drive how they respond, which is quite sad, versus just pure data. So get rid of the politics, look at the data, and let the data take you where it needs to go. That would be my response.
Thank you for your candor, Dale. Jarrett, what are your thoughts? Are we doing enough?
Yeah, so Jen, I agree with Dale's comments there that we did have a slow start, that many corporations had prepared and did have plans, but I think what we saw was they didn't react fast enough, and the companies that were agile and reacted quickly in the beginning were able to navigate well early on. So I do think as an industry we're catching up. right? And so I believe that the tools are there. It's been amazing to see the innovation that's come on the back of this crisis across the board. It's remarkable how fast companies have pivoted, and now I do believe we're getting to a place where I believe it's getting safe to return to work, and I am optimistic that it's getting safe to return to travel soon. So I am a believer that as an industry we have progressed from that slow start that Dale articulated.
Great, thanks, Jared. Bruce, over to you.
Yeah. Well, I think the industry has done awesome. It wasn't risky to travel except maybe in your automobile prior to COVID-19. And the automobile is probably still the biggest risk to a traveler during COVID-19. And so this is not a travel industry problem because they've pretty much nailed it. What this is a public health problem and a perception problem by all of us around this disease. And so an education process with clear messaging about what an individual should be doing and where they can be more careful if they want to be. But if you look what the ground transport, what the airports, what the airlines, the hotels have done, largely spent a lot of money on touch, which is proven to be less of an infectious vector, but still one, so we can't ignore it. But of course, airborne being the biggest one, and in a closed space with multiple people, especially not wearing masks, super high risk. People in a room reasonably spaced with masks, lower risk. Outdoors with masks, very, very low risk. And if we just manage those things, people can do productive things and get on the road. But we're failing on the public health side, because if I have high infection rates and I put those people on a plane and it's a cocoon all the way to the destination, and then they jump into bars and whatnot, and then that's how the spread is. That's why it's a public health issue, not a travel industry issue. And we've got to sort that out, and we've got to make it work.
Thanks, Bruce. So you touched on something that I want to go ahead and pull the audience into this. So we talk about sort of, Dale, you mentioned just the importance of data and facts and science, yet we know that so much of travel has an emotional component, and people are really, a lot of their feelings and their emotions are driving their decision to travel. But for those who have made that decision to travel, I'm curious to find out where the buyers on the line today think that their travelers are most exposed to risk. So I'm going to ask the audience to answer a poll question. And Carlos, if I can get you to push out that second poll, where do travelers think they're most exposed to risk? It's not popping up for me. And then gentlemen, a slightly different version of the question for you. I want you to take your props that I sent you in the mail, take your whiteboards, and I want you to rank these 4 options from least risky to most risky. So if we think about airport, airplane, hotel, and ground transportation, so if 1 is the least risky, 4 is the most risky. If you can write your answers on your whiteboard, I'll have you reveal that in a minute. No, Carlos, I actually want the other poll, please. Where do you think the people are most exposed to risk? If you could do that for me, please. So audience, where do your travelers think they're at most exposure to risk? So airport, airplane, hotel, or ground transportation. So hopefully that's popping up on your screen. We'll give you a couple seconds to fill out. Now we've got the answers coming in. Got to see a couple of responses coming in the chat as well. So Carlos, if we could go ahead and push out these poll results. So I'm going to show the audience results first and then turn to our panel. All right, so from the audience, the ranking is airport is most risky, followed by airplane, by ground transportation. So, gentlemen, if you can hold up your whiteboards, let's see your responses. Spelling and handwriting don't count. All right. So we've got. All right. So we've got a little bit of not a discrepancy, but difference of opinion. Let's say so. Bruce and Jarrett, you're saying that ground transportation is least risky.
Highest risk.
Oh, highest. Oh, so you
Highest risk.
Highest risk. All right. And
Number one.
Gotcha. And Dale saying airport is highest risk. So, Jarrett, tell me why you think ground transportation is highest risk, and then Dale, I'm going to have you talk about why you think the airport's the highest risk. So, Jarrett, you go first. Defend your.
Well, yeah, I think Bruce explained the risk of ground transportation. So yes, there's the risk of COVID, but there's also every other risk that's happening in the world. And as a company, car accidents is one of the most risky things that happen around the world. So just in terms of pure risk, that is probably the most risky thing that would happen. And then I think if you put the the COVID factor in there, it's hard to social distance. You're not sure about the mask, et cetera, et cetera.
Great.
Bruce,
Thanks,
you want to
Jarrett.
add to that?
No, it's just that most ground transport by a traveler is the driver, the traveler, in a short duration. So it is the highest risk activity, but your vulnerability is pretty low in a vehicle in that model. But yes, I'm not arguing if it's 2 or 3 people in the car and the windows are up and they're not wearing masks, then who knows who's asymptomatic, right?
All right.
And that's the education part, right? That's what we need to educate people about. So.
Great. So we'll talk about how to do that education here in a minute. Dale, talk to us about why you think airport's the riskiest place.
Yep. So do you want me to go from bottom to top or just airport?
Just airport because of time.
Okay. Number one, there is no national US FAA standard. It is a disaster. There is no TSA standard across the country. Ultimately, the airlines, there is no standard. Delta is different than Southwest. Southwest is different than United. United is different than American. And they have all fumbled this, in my opinion, other than Delta. At the airport, ultimately, you are being led to this end state. You are going to sit in an airplane surrounded by human beings, many of which don't want to wear their mask. They're going to take it off during the flight. You're going to sit there for anywhere between an hour to 8 hours, rebreathing air that some airplanes have been remodeled and some haven't. Many of the airlines have already changed their cleaning standard, and it's back to business as usual. Pack the airplane. That's my defense. I think it's a mess. And until there is a federal standard for the US FAA, there's a federal TSA screening standard, and there is one standard for the airlines, we will keep people getting sick on the airplane.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Moving on. I just want to talk a little bit about, all of you mentioned that not just corporate travel, but sort of corporate America wasn't really prepared for this crisis yet. We've seen companies be very agile. They've been flexible. They've adapted pretty quickly. I think that oftentimes, larger global programs are more equipped to deal with challenges, but we've got lots of buyers in the audience that run small and mid-sized programs. So Bruce, I know that WorldAware actually has an SME product.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to any of the unique challenges for programs that are smaller in scale and how, whether it's WorldAware or ISOS or Global Guardian, can really help that segment of the market?
Resources. Smaller companies, especially taking the brunt of a lot of the economic stress, have laid off a lot of people. And so they just, there's even, one person doing it all, usually. They don't have on-site travel for people. They basically call a phone number and hope to get help. And of course, travel agencies are staffed down And so I would say it's pretty lonely out there for the small to medium sized companies, which is 99.7% of companies in the United States, right, are under 500 people, and 93 point something percent are under 100 people. And so it really comes down to, and they don't have access to global guardians and international SOSs and those kinds of things as well. A lot of times they just wing it and hope that their regular health insurance will cover them, and which, unfortunately falls short. So, a product like Dale has, which is kind of an all-in program, is very attractive to a small company, because if they are going to put money on the line, they can go to one place. SOS has, their membership models. We don't do medical. We integrate medical from one of the providers. And that gets more complicated for a small business. And so I think, one-stop, single belly to push is a good approach if they can check the box.
Sure. So you talked about the importance of having resources. And so we know industry partners are so key at any time, but especially during challenging times. But I think it's fair to say that we have a travel ecosystem that is complex, it's fragmented. And so in conversations the BTN Group had with buyers at the height of the crisis, one of the complaints from travel managers was the disconnect between TMCs and risk management companies. So, canceled reservations were still showing. It looked like people were traveling when they weren't. Mm-hmm. There were gaps in traveler tracking. There was lots of reports of finger pointing, right? TMC blamed the risk management company. The risk company blamed the TMC. Jared, I'd love to ask you if you can speak to SOS's response to this. Has progress been made? Can you give us a status update? Are you playing nice with the TMCs now?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We always play nice with the TMCs. We consider them as one of our key partners in travel risk management. And what happened during COVID and the mass cancellations was unprecedented. And I think, as a industry, we navigated it fairly well together, right? There was quite a lot of collaboration between the risk management companies and the TMCs working through the challenges. We'd never seen anything quite like it. And to be honest, we're still cleaning up, right? There's still a lot of data in our systems that we are working to purge or get out. And it's the balance between, do you purge everything out and start afresh, or do you err on the side of having more information in there so you can potentially communicate? So we've been taking the stance of over communicating is probably better than under communicating. So we've been leaving a little bit more data in there. We are in the process of working with the TMCs to see how we can avoid this in the future. I can honestly indicate we don't have a solution right now with them. I don't know if the other gentlemen have been able to solve that yet. The final point, I guess, is, trying to move away from the reliance of, travel itineraries or PNRs to track, right? So is there a way to do more sophisticated tracking using your cell phones, et cetera, et cetera? And that's the area where we're spending more of our time to avoid this in the future.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
Jen.
yeah.
So, Bruce, do you want to add to that?
Two things. One is travel data is really hard, right? And we work with partners like Traxo and others to sweep in data that's not necessarily right on that PNR queue. Travel agencies sometimes fail to queue canceled trips, but as soon as they're alerted to it, our experience has been they've shorn up their processes, and that kind of went away once it was identified. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is you have to have a multi-layered solution if you're going to have resiliency. And so I would say the PNR enables you to do risk because you have foreknowledge and you can do some assessment, risk management, but there should be a GPS, or at least what we call location awareness capability by that traveler. So if you don't get the trip or you don't get the change and they pop up in London, you know they're in London. And so if you don't have that redundancy, you don't have resiliency. So Dale?
Jen, can I go?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this will be somewhat offensive to TMCs, but I have to say it. Number one, I don't think this is unprecedented at all. 9/11, this happened. The estimate was 68% of TMCs were tracking accurately. The Paris attacks, 2017 back-to-back hurricanes, the Turkey coup. What we just experienced from the beginning of COVID in the whole TMC travel tracking PNR industry is not new, nor is it unique. It is a failed model. In my opinion, it's garbage in, garbage out. We do it. We were forced to do it because as we started signing Fortune 500s, they were conditioned that this was quote unquote duty of care. It does not equate to duty of care. It is a very small piece of duty of care. Ultimately, if you don't have an active tracking system or option, as Bruce just described and Jared just described, that is the only real solution for accuracy here. A majority of our clients now have bought into their senior management that are considered assets, their high volume travelers, and the people living in high risk areas are tracked actively. They can turn it on and off for their privacy, but they are tracked actively. And then for the masses, we do the PNR tracking. Ultimately, I think that's where the industry is going because PNR tracking is never better than about 70% accurate. It's garbage in, garbage out. All of us are only as good as the airlines and the TMC and the data we have. So therefore, if we know it's almost always 30% inaccurate, and as soon as you have a major event, it's probably 50 to 60% inaccurate. This is not a new problem. We just seen we're going to get through COVID. The question will be, is everybody going to bury their head and go back to status quo or not?
So I can't be quiet, Jen. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just because, 1970s technology sucks doesn't mean you throw it away. Okay? If the company doesn't know that you're going to take a trip so that they can plan the budget, so that they understand what your potential risk is, so that they can spend the money and the time to get immunizations or whatever you need to go on that trip, then you're screwed. Dropping into Sana'a, Yemen and firing up your phone and saying, I'm in Sana'a now. What help is that? It's important as a backstop, but the company needs to know ahead of time. They need to do the risk assessment. They need to make budgetary decisions. They need to get visas. That's what needs to get solved. Does it need to be solved with the PNR? No. But do we need foreknowledge for planning? Absolutely. So that's where I'm coming from.
All right,
Bruce,
so
my
let's
counter
talk.
is once you're there, once you're in it, none of that matters. Once the shooting
I
starts in
said,
Paris,
Dale,
once
I
the shooting
said
in
you
Vegas
need
starts,
both. You need both.
totally
All
agree.
right,
Totally agree.
I'm going to call time out so we can talk about how to perhaps take this time where there is less travel happening to take a look at this and make some progress, right? Because clearly it's a problem. And we can't afford to wait for the next crisis to happen to just bring it to the surface again. Also, apparently some people in the chat want me to close my bedroom door, but if I stand up right now, I'm going to rip my earbuds out of my ears. So it's just going to have to stay open. So pausing travel. This is giving a lot of travel managers a real opportunity to take a look at where the gaps are in their program, right? So we often break down the whole journey into pre-trip, in-trip, post-trip. And so it's a great way to say, all right, let's look at this. Let's look at pre-trip. What's working well, what's not. In-trip, and so on and so forth. So again, I want to bring the audience back in. So Marco, if this time I'm going to ask you to pull up that very first polling question, if you would. So gentlemen, on your whiteboards, what I want you to write down is which phase of the trip do you think has the most gaps right now? Where are managed travel programs most vulnerable, right? Where do they need the most work? Is it pre-trip, in-trip, post-trip? And travel managers, tell us where you think your program is most vulnerable right now. Like, where do you need to put most of your efforts into? All right, so I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds to have some responses come in. I'm going to share the audience responses first, and then I'm going to turn to our panel. So Marco, if we can go ahead and push out the results. All right, so audience, it looks like most of you are saying in-trip is still where you got the most exposure. So about a little more than half of you said in-trip. But 38% of you still felt like you needed to do a lot of work pre-trip, and then post-trip came in third. So I want to turn to our panel, so go ahead and hold up your responses. All right, Dale saying 1,000% in-trip. Jared's actually saying pre-trip, and Bruce is also saying in-trip. So Jared, I'm actually going to go to you. Why do you think pre-trip is where there's the most vulnerability right now?
So I think, there with pre-trip, a lot of the locations that we would have taken for granted in the past, or we can no longer take them for granted. So, has the travel management programs, or have the travel programs adopted to handling that, right? And today, obtaining information, consolidated, easy, around risks with COVID globally, having your employees be able to self-service and get information about COVID easily. And I think also just getting trip approval, going to locations where now are high risk or medium risk, which in the past were no-brainers, right? And I think about it domestically in the U.S. as our employees are getting back out traveling. How are we ensuring that if they are going from one location to the next, they're doing so in an approved fashion and one where they're educated, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I've found that at least as in our organization, we see the gap. When it comes to in-trip, that's where International SOS kind of has the medical assistance aspect of it, and we've been supporting a lot of our customers in that. So I kind of feel that we have a network that can help in that area, but there's a gap in that pre-trip approval process and information.
Great, thanks. So now, Dale, I'm going to go over to you because you 1,000% said it's in-trip. So tell us why.
I think pre-trip is a commoditized service. Bruce is one of the four founders of this. I think, a lot of people associate Bruce, and we have mad respect for Bruce. I think he's created a good part of this industry in creating that pre-trip intel. What do you need? Who gets to approve this? All those systems are wonderful and out there. I think they're commoditized, and a lot of people sell it, and they're tied to TMCs. It's wonderful. It's great. I think just based on, just use COVID. In the last 6 months, all of these problems have been people that are sick with COVID and can't get back home, people that are stuck because the embassy and the State Department are completely overwhelmed, are not trained, they are not manned, they are not equipped to deal with this at scale. Borders are closing, airspace is closing, and people believe that just because the airspace is closed, you can't get in. Or they believe because the State Department says, nope, the border's closed, that you can't get across a border. None of that is true. So at the end of the day, our thesis has always been technology alone does not solve problems in the real world. You need technology, it's a given, and there's a lot of great technology. But once it goes sideways, technology is not going to solve the problem for you. Therefore, in-trip is where all of the major problems have been. Again, every time there's a major event, whether it's a natural disaster, man-made, or now a pandemic.
Great. Bruce, I have a slightly different version of the question for you. Can you hold up your answers again? You actually put post-trip as number 2. Everyone else ranked it at the bottom, including the audience. I feel like post-trip is sometimes an afterthought. Can you tell us why you thought post-trip has more exposure right now than pre-trip?
Sure, but I'll take license. We've nailed pre-trip since 1999. when something's going on, it's going on in trip. And you're seeing a wave of providers now providing kind of micro threat and incident data to provide, because we don't know what people, I mean, the PNR and the trip is the plan. We don't know what they're actually doing and where they're wandering off to on the weekend to go see the Taj Mahal or to go on a rafting trip in Vietnam, right? So that in trip we have not nailed, all right? And we have completely neglected post trip. And any military operation, any type of emergency action that you're doing that after action to understand, getting the feedback about what worked, what didn't work, where did we fall short, where were the gaps? We are we're not even on first base. So that's why that's my order. Right, Dale?
I completely agree. I would put it in the exact same order. Yes, sir.
All right. Dale, I want to go back to you. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about the airlines that there's no national or no consistent strategy across all of them. And if we just look at how the pandemic is being dealt with in general, we know that there is no national here in the U.S. That's just a fact. I'm not trying to comment one way or another. We've got various local and state mandates, not to mention the various differences across the globe. So how can travel managers help to communicate with and educate their travelers using science and data, considering there's such a range of personal opinions on this situation?
Yep. So here's my answer, and it's quite simple. Number one, you have to have a trusted, non-political source of data. There's probably 2 or 3 that you should be using that are quite obvious, in addition to what services are out there. Once you've bought into that data feed where you can see what is the policy of India today, what is the policy of Hawaii today, what is the policy of New York, the state of New York today, that again, I think is a pretty commoditized product at this point. It's out there. You've got to have that first and foremost. Once you overlay that into your industry, your business, and you identify in this period who you believe, and this is key verbiage here, who is key and essential that still has to travel. And I tie this back, and I've been saying this now for 6 months. If you have a multi-million-dollar merger, if you have a multi-million-dollar acquisition where trust has to be built and you have to vet the players, and there is access into that country, then sure, you need to put those people, if they agree to do it, take every precaution and take the risk and get them on the ground in that country if it's even authorized or feasible. But that policy has to be updated based on what is feasible, what your risk tolerance is, and how you're going to manage it. And what is your definition of key and essential? Why are you putting people on an aircraft and taking this risk? And the only thing that we can come up with in business goes back to this word of trust. If part of the business transaction mandates trust has to be built, it cannot be done over VTC, it cannot be done over a phone con, and it cannot be done through email. That's your first criteria. From there, everything else flows into your policy and then what is legally authorized to get people in and around these different countries.
Thank you. Jared or Bruce, either of you want to add anything to that? All right. Let's move on then.
I do want to give just I'll give a quick shout out, Jen.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jared.
So Bruce, then Jared. Let's start with Bruce, then we'll go to Jared.
Underneath all of the chaos that we think we are seeing, IATA, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, the Association of Airports have been working to create baselines, not only have been, produced baseline requirements and standards. So it's not a complete free-for-all. Now, can airports and airlines do things differently and enhance from there? Absolutely, and they are. So just I'm putting that shout out to those industries because they have done a decent job of doing that. So that was just what I wanted to throw in. Go ahead, Jared.
Yes. So I was just going to add to Dale's comment. I mean, essential business travel has to happen. You have to determine who's essential. You do the risk reward calculation that Bruce highlighted, and it's our job as travel risk management companies to enable that travel and to prepare your travelers to keep them safe when they're there, and then ultimately get them back safely and back into the work. Return to work back in their home country.
Absolutely. And Bruce, thank you for talking about, IATA and the, Hotel Lodging Association, because, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the incredible work that all of those suppliers across the industry have been doing to try
and the speed at which they did it.
Exactly. I mean, it's amazing the collaboration that has happened. This crisis really has brought people together, and the work they did in such a short period of time to enhance health and safety standards, work to make travelers feel as comfortable and safe as possible. So in the few minutes that we have left, obviously, COVID is top of mind for everyone. The current climate is challenging to say the least, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. We've got hurricane season, we've got protests. I don't even know what to say about the state of the economy. We've got a US presidential election coming up here. So Bruce, how do all of those other things factor in and possibly compound the situation with COVID?
I'll give you a quick summary of two things. One is the aperture of a travel manager should have already, it should be clear that they should be focused on protecting people, not a trip. Okay? So they need to partner with others in the company, leveraging the technology and the information that they have to keep all personnel informed about where COVID is outbreaking, where protests are going to be tonight. If I'm in Chicago traveling and I get a neat message from SOS or Global Guardian or whomever, and there's 7 people in the office looking at me like, why don't we get that message? The local people, right? It's that simple. So it's people risk management. When I started in 1999, travel risk management. And I'm telling you today, you've got to reorient to people risk management. And once you do that orientation, then everything that's going on in this planet, climate, social unrest, economics, whatever it may be, informing the company and ultimately the people so that they can prepare and hopefully avoid the problem is the goal. Saving lives, protecting the operations of the business. Everything else is what I now call continuous risk management. That is the nature of our world from here forward. Every hour of every day, we need to be on top of our game, working across the silos to protect people in the business.
Thank you, Bruce. Jared, I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in, and Bruce, you sort of answered this question a little bit already, but considering the events of this year and the lessons that we've learned along the way, is there anything else we should be thinking of in terms of how we reframe this concept of duty of care, travel risk management? So, Bruce is talking about the focus being on the people. Jared, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Bruce there that we need to pivot to people risk management and workforce risk management. I think when you look at duty of care, it needs to expand beyond how it initially came out with travel, and it needs to extend into the workplace. And I think it also, with so much work from home, it needs to potentially extend in, to the home and how you keep your entire workforce safe. And then on the flip side, I think there's increased importance on the concept of duty of loyalty, where if we're as companies putting together these playbooks and these safeguards, then the employee themselves has to take a responsibility to uphold their end, right? So if I'm coming in every day and I'm getting my temperature screened and I get asked by the nurse, do I have symptoms? I need to be honest. Or if I've gone to North Carolina and I'm not supposed to be back in the office for 2 weeks, I need to declare that. And so the concept of extending the duty of care to the entire workforce is certainly out there. And then on the flip side, how the employee handles themselves is also equally as important, I think, in this environment.
Fantastic. All right. So to wrap up, I want to ask each of you if you have just like one final piece of advice for travel managers as they navigate the remainder of 2020 going into 21. And we'll go in this order. We'll go Dale, and then Jarrett, and then Bruce. So Dale, one final piece of advice for people.
I think that, as I think Jared said earlier, we're in this bit of a tactical pause with global travel being minimized. My advice to everyone in this space, and travel managers specifically, is I think you should reread word for word, letter for letter, and redline your insurance policies so you understand what you really have, whether that is security evacuation, medical evacuation, medical support, so on and so forth. Because I think a lot of people thought they were covered when this pandemic started, and they started to realize very quickly they were not. I would go through all of that. And then I would look at the integration off of your platform, your existing platforms, and you need to ask yourself, did this provide value in crisis? Did it actually solve problems? If it did not, then I think you need to relook that platform. That would be my advice.
Thank you, sir. Jarrett, final piece of advice.
For me, right now, with the economy and every company, in somewhat of in a struggle, it's all about showing value. And I think as a travel manager, there's a lot of value that you can show your organization right now, be it from reviewing your duty of care providers and ensuring they're the up to speed on the support that you need, or relooking at your TMC programs and ensuring that you're getting the best value there. I mean, stuff that I'm sure all the managers are doing, but as there's a little bit of a pause in travel, that it's a great opportunity to just reassess your program in all aspects of it and ensure that it's the best value for your organization.
Excellent. And Bruce.
Let's see, maybe have your psychologist on speed dial. We're in for a long haul. Even if we get a vaccine by, at election day, end of the year, first quarter, when you go through the math of a vaccine, we're looking at 9 to 18 months of actually getting this to where it can be productive. So when you have that as a backdrop, I'm going to say for a travel manager to get travel going again, they better really have a plan of how do I get vaccination to the travelers so that they can work through these travel corridors, right, and not end up with 14-day quarantines. Since that all of that stuff is coming online right now, the protocols are being put in place. You should be looking at who is your primary and backup provider to provide that immunization, or in this case, vaccine, for your travelers, and be prepared for that, because we're going to go through a very bumpy road through the rest of 2021.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask everyone who's on the session to hang on with me after I thank the speakers. Just give me 2 more minutes for some closing remarks. But Dale, Bruce, Jarrett, thank you for keeping it real. We've gotten lots of really amazing feedback in the comments. So appreciate your candor. Audience, definitely give us your feedback on the session. Carlos, I'm going to ask you if you can pull the gentleman out of the video feed. We'll see you all later. And this brings us to the end of the inaugural Business Travel Show America. So it has been an exciting 2 days. And on behalf of the BTN Group, I want to thank the 1,900 plus buyers who registered, the almost 90 suppliers who registered or exhibited and sponsored the event, our 70 plus amazing speakers. And with your support and engagement, I'm so pleased to share that we've raised just over $3,000 for ECPAT USA. So give yourselves a virtual round of applause. As I close out, I'm not going to choose one of the many overused adjectives to describe the past few months in the state of the industry. I'll just say that I really hope that this event gave all of you a chance to come together, to learn, to network, to talk with potential partners and prepare for whatever comes next. So look for a post-event email on Monday and provide us with your feedback. I know that for many of us, this was the first time taking part in a virtual event of this scale, and it just feels different, right? It's not good or bad, it's just different. So I have to say that, I can't wait for the day that I can see all of you in person again. So until then, wash your hands, wear your masks, and join us at one of the remaining BTN Group events scheduled from now through the end of the year. You can find the schedule at businesstravelnews.com. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day.